I want to begin with something honest about the title of this conversation. Stopping caring what everyone thinks is not what actually happens, and the framing that suggests it does, the cultural narrative of the person who finally, triumphantly, liberates themselves from all concern about other people's opinions, is a misrepresentation of what genuine psychological development actually produces. And it deserves to be corrected before anything else. What actually happens, what Gabor Maté observed in the people who had done the most genuine interior work, who had moved most significantly from the adapted self toward the authentic one, is something more nuanced and more genuinely significant than the simple cessation of caring. What happens is that other people's opinions become one source of information among many, rather than the primary organizing principle of the self's sense of its own reality. The opinion does not stop mattering entirely. Connection with others matters to human beings because human beings are social organisms whose nervous systems require genuine relational contact for their most fundamental processes of regulation and meaning-making. An indifference to all other people's perceptions is not psychological health. It is a different kind of defended isolation. What changes is the specific weight that other people's opinions carry in the interior life, the specific authority they are granted over the self's sense of its own adequacy, its own direction, its own genuine reality, and that change from other people's opinions as the primary arbiter of the self's worth to other people's opinions as genuinely interesting information that the self can evaluate from its own interior ground is one of the most significant developments available in a human life. Today, I want to give you the honest account of what actually changes when this shift genuinely occurs. Not the dramatic version, the real one. Gabor Maté understood the organized around others' opinions self with clinical precision. He traced it to the same developmental origin as every other expression of the adapted self. The child whose sense of its own adequacy was calibrated primarily through external response, whose worth was most reliably communicated through approval and most reliably threatened through disapproval, develops a self that continues, in adult life, to use external opinion as its primary instrument of self-assessment. This is not vanity. It is the entirely predictable consequence of a developmental environment in which external approval was the most reliable available signal of the self's genuine worth. The child who received consistent, unconditional regard, whose worth was communicated as inherent rather than as contingent on approval, develops an internal sense of worth that does not require continuous external confirmation to remain real. The child who received primarily conditional regard, whose worth was most reliably communicated through specific performances that generated specific approvals, develops a self whose sense of its own worth remains in adult life, substantially dependent on the continuation of the approval that originally established it. Understanding this origin changes the relationship with the pattern. The person who organizes their life around other people's opinions is not weak or insufficiently self-confident in any simple sense. They are a person whose developmental history installed a specific instrument of self-assessment, external approval, that the present self continues to operate with the faithfulness of a system that learned it was the most reliable available tool for the job. Genuine change in this pattern does not come from deciding to stop caring. It comes from the gradual development of a different and more reliable instrument of self-assessment, one that is located in the interior rather than in the exterior, one that is available regardless of whether the approval is present, one that does not fluctuate with the opinions of the people who happen to be in the current environment. That instrument is what Gabor Maté called genuine self-knowledge, the specific, honest, internally generated understanding of what is actually true about the self, its values, its genuine responses to genuine experience, its actual assessment of its own conduct, that does not require external confirmation to be real. Now I want to give you the 7 specific changes that occur when this shift genuinely begins to happen. The first change. Decisions become considerably less effortful. The person whose decisions are primarily organized around the management of other people's opinions carries a specific and largely invisible cognitive load in every decision-making process. The assessment of what each available option will produce in the various audiences whose opinions matter, the specific calculation of which choice will be most approved of, least criticized, most consistent with the image that has been carefully constructed and maintained. As the authentic self develops genuine interior ground, this calculation does not disappear entirely. Appropriate consideration of others is part of genuine mature decision-making, but it reduces from the primary organizing factor to one consideration among several, and the reduction of that cognitive load produces something practically significant. Decisions become considerably less effortful. The energy that was consumed in the approval management calculation becomes available for the genuine assessment of what actually matters in the choice being made. The second change. The experience of criticism changes quality. The person whose self-worth is primarily organized around external approval experiences criticism with the full physiological activation of a genuine threat. Because to the nervous system calibrated around approval, criticism genuinely is a threat. To the sense of worth that depends on the continuation of the approval, to the self whose reality is substantially confirmed by the regard of others. As genuine interior ground develops, the experience of criticism changes, not because criticism stops having any emotional impact. The person who feels nothing in response to critical feedback has not developed genuine interior ground. They have developed genuine indifference to information that actually matters. But the quality of the impact changes. The criticism that previously activated the full threat response begins to activate something more like genuine curiosity. Is this accurate? Does this reveal something worth attending to? The information value of the criticism becomes more available because the threat quality has reduced enough to permit genuine evaluation. The third change. Approval becomes genuinely pleasant rather than genuinely necessary. This is the most practically significant change and the one that most clearly distinguishes genuine interior development from the performed indifference to others' opinions that sometimes masquerades as it. The person who has genuinely developed interior ground does not become indifferent to approval. Approval from people whose judgment they genuinely respect for conduct they themselves genuinely assess as worthy of approval remains genuinely pleasant. It just stops being necessary. The pleasant and the necessary are two different experiences, and the shift from necessary to pleasant is the specific quality of change that genuine interior development produces. The fourth change. The specific exhaustion of impression management reduces. Impression management, the continuous, largely automatic work of monitoring and adjusting the self's presentation in response to the perceived expectations and preferences of the various audiences in the relational environment, is metabolically expensive. The person who has been doing it for decades without recognizing it as work has been carrying a chronic load of effort that the absence of genuine interior ground made invisible. As genuine interior ground develops and impression management reduces from a primary occupation to an occasional conscious choice, a specific quality of energy becomes available that was previously entirely consumed. Not just the energy of the impression management itself, but the energy of the continuous monitoring that impression management requires, the scanning of the relational environment, the assessment of the audience, the calibration of the presentation. As this monitoring reduces, the energy it consumed becomes available for genuine engagement with the actual present moment. The fifth change, solitude becomes qualitatively different. The person whose self-worth is organized around external approval has a specific relationship with solitude. The absence of the approving audience removes the primary instrument of self-assessment, and what remains in the solitude is the self without the confirmation that external approval provides. For many people whose worth is organized around approval, this unconfirmed self feels genuinely uncertain. The solitude that is not genuinely comfortable is the solitude of a self that does not yet feel real without external confirmation of its reality. As genuine interior ground develops, this relationship with solitude changes. The self that has genuine interior ground does not require external confirmation to feel real. It is real, genuinely, internally, self-evidently real, regardless of whether the approving audience is present. And the solitude that contains a genuinely real self has a completely different quality than the solitude that contains an unconfirmed one. It becomes genuinely restful rather than genuinely uncertain. The sixth change. Genuine disagreement becomes available in relationships that previously required agreement. The person organized around others' approval cannot easily disagree with the people whose approval matters most. The disagreement risks the approval, and the risk of the approval produces the specific anxiety of someone whose worth is at stake in the relational exchange. The result is the specific, often entirely unconscious management of genuine perspective, the softening of the genuine view, the qualification of the honest assessment, the specific performed agreement that maintains the relational atmosphere at the cost of the genuine exchange that genuine relationship actually requires. As genuine interior ground develops, genuine disagreement becomes more available, not as confrontation or as the performance of independence, both of which are organized around others' reactions in their own ways, as the simple, honest expression of a genuinely different perspective by a self that does not require agreement to feel secure in the relationship. This availability of genuine disagreement is, paradoxically, one of the things that makes relationships considerably more sustaining than the agreement-managed versions that preceded it, because genuine connection requires two genuine perspectives, and the person who can genuinely disagree is the person who is genuinely present. The seventh change, and the most fundamental, the quality of daily experience changes in a way that is difficult to describe but immediately recognizable from the inside. The life organized around others' opinions has a specific quality, a slight but pervasive quality of performing rather than living, of being slightly outside the experience, monitoring how it appears rather than fully inside it, simply having it. This is not dramatic. It does not announce itself as performance. It is simply the specific texture of a life that is substantially organized around the management of its own appearance rather than around its genuine inhabitation. As genuine interior ground develops and the organization around others' opinions reduces, this quality changes. The slight but pervasive performing quality begins to reduce. The experience of simply having the experience, without the simultaneous monitoring of how it appears, becomes more available, and the specific, quiet, often entirely unexpected quality of genuine presence in the ordinary moments of ordinary daily life that this shift produces is, in Gabor Maté's clinical observation, one of the most genuinely significant changes available in a human life. Not because the life's external circumstances have changed, because the person inhabiting those circumstances is, for perhaps the first time, more fully actually there. And the privilege of a lifetime, the one Gabor Maté pointed toward with everything he had, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not the version organized around what everyone thinks. Who you truly are, which has been available all along, waiting only for the interior ground that makes genuine inhabitation finally possible.